Hello, my name is Masao Suzuki, and I'm speaking today as the chair of the Joint Nationalities Commission of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And today's topic is on birtherism and the fight against the legacy of slavery. And this presentation was motivated following the choice of
my name is Masao Suzuki,
and I'm speaking today as the chair of the Joint Nationalities Commission
and the
of the birtherist attacks on her, the attacks questioning her eligibility to be vice president or president of the United States. And so I'd like to get started. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I also will try and keep Trump was not oh shoot, start over. Okay, and what do I need to do to go into, okay, because I don't see you now, crap. Okay, so start from the beginning. Okay, so anyway, my name is Masao Suzuki. I'm speaking today as chair of the Joint Nationalities Commission of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And the topic for today is birtherism and the fight against the legacy of slavery. So this presentation was motivated by the fact that Trump and other right-wingers began to attack Kamala Harris's citizenship and therefore her eligibility to be vice president and then president of the United States following presidential candidate Joe Biden's choice of her as his vice presidential nominee. And Trump and others have a long history of trying to attack oppressed nationality, African American and Asian American and others, attacking their citizenship. And he did this with President Obama back in 2008. People tried to claim that Obama was not born in the United States, despite the fact that he was born in the United States. He was born in Hawaii. And this is basically part of the whole tendency of just sort of making up an alternative reality. So in this alternative reality, the US economy is doing great, and we're doing great on COVID-19, and Kamala Harris is not eligible to be vice president. Trump, this is not only attacked Obama and Harris, but he also called for the end to citizenship by birth in the United States. And he wanted to deport all of the undocumented immigrants and their American-born children. And their American-born children are a natural-born citizen. So basically what he was calling for was ethnic cleansing of, in particular, Mexicanos and Chicanos and Central Americans in the United States. Trump, again, as I mentioned, is not the only one. Republican former presidential candidates Ben Carson, former candidate Scott Walker, and also Senator Rand Paul also opposed this right to citizenship for people born in the United States. And on the local level, state legislator Pierce was one of the authors of Arizona's anti-immigrant Senate Bill 1070 that attacked the right to citizenship on the local and state level. So what is this all about? This is, in fact, an attack on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that was passed in 1868. And the 14th Amendment says, or begins, saying all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. And so there's been a long history of challenges to the 14th Amendment. During World War II, when 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent were incarcerated in concentration camps, there were calls to strip citizenship from American-born Japanese, such as my father, the second generation. This is a continuation of the anti-Asian sentiment that began in the form of the anti-Chinese movement. And for example, this photo here shows an 1885 massacre of Chinese American miners in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Oh, I'm having all these technical problems. Hold on. I got to start over again. Okay. And where should I resume? Okay, but I need to go back to the, keep on going. Okay. Oh. So there were state and local laws aimed at the Chinese, many of them emanating out of California. San Francisco was a center for the anti-Chinese movement. And this ultimately led to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act that barred almost all immigration from China. The Chinese American community has a long history of fighting for their rights, going back to protests against anti-Chinese, the foreign miners' taxes, anti-Chinese residential discrimination, going on strike, workers on the Transcontinental Railroad. And so one of the big legal cases that came up as part of the struggle of Chinese Americans for equality was around the case of Wong Kim Ark. So this is his Chinese name in US as standard. He would be Kim Ark Wong. And so Wong was born in the United States in San Francisco around 1870. And he traveled twice to China as a young man. And the first time he came back in, and there was no issue. But on the second trip, he was denied entry to the United States in 1894 on the grounds that he was Chinese and not a citizen of the United States, despite the fact that he had been born here. And so Wong gathered support in the Chinese American community to fight his exclusion in court. He was incarcerated during this time on Angel Island, the famous or infamous immigration station in the San Francisco Bay. And he argued that, and his lawyers argued that he was a US citizen by virtue of being born here in the United States. And so Wong's case went all the way to the US Supreme Court. Then a few years later, as the case worked its way up, in 1898, the US Supreme Court ruled on a 6-2 majority vote in Wong versus United States that Kim Ark-Wong was a citizen by virtue of birth. And the Supreme Court established that, or clarified that the only exceptions would be children of diplomats the children of diplomats or the children of a foreign occupation army, since in both cases the parents are not subject to US jurisdiction. So what does this have to do, this struggle for the 14th Amendment, or to defend the 14th Amendment actually? What does this have to do with the legacy of slavery? Well, the 14th Amendment was one of the 3 post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution written to provide rights to African Americans. And so while the struggle against slavery had to be ultimately won through the Civil War, through the biggest war that the United States has ever fought, there were 3 legal amendments to establish these rights. The first one in 1865 abolished slavery in the United States. All right, so this freed all of the slaves here. The second one, which I was talking about today, is the 14th Amendment, which basically said that all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. And I'll go into a little more why is that important? Why weren't African Americans considered citizens once they were freed? And then the 15th Amendment, which is also important in its own right, and I think it's going to be important coming up, unfortunately, this November, is it bans the use of race to limit voting rights. So that's a whole nother topic about voter suppression and seems more and more obvious attempts to steal elections that are going on, but we'll leave that for now. So what does the 14th Amendment have to do with slavery? Well, this is because the 14th Amendment was designed to override the 1857 Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. And so Dred Scott was a slave born about 1800, and he was actually living in a free state. He lived in Minnesota. He got married. He worked. He was rented out as a slave. So he was working for others, and then, of course, his wages went to the slave owner. And he actually sued for freedom, saying that he was living in a free state. He was acting in effect as a free man by being able to get married, because slaves in the South were in general not able to get married. And then he was working for others and getting paid. He was not just working for his mistress. And his mistress actually even refused to let him buy his own freedom. So after a long legal battle, 11-year battle involving both state and federal court, the Dred Scott case ended up before the US Supreme Court that ruled in 1857 for Mrs. Sanford, who was Dred Scott's owner. And the Supreme Court ruling, again, it was a majority ruling, stated that African slaves and their descendants could never be US citizens and did not have any of the protections of the Constitution. And so this broadened the ban on citizenship rights, not just to slaves, but even any of their descendants, even if they were free, could not or did not have the rights of US citizenship. And this decision empowered the Southern slave owners and actually galvanized the anti-slavery movement. And this led to the Civil War, because basically what the abolitionist movement saw, that there was no legal way to eliminate slavery in the United States with the with the Supreme Court ruling. And so by this time already, armed struggle had broken out in some of the border states, such as in Kansas, and this ultimately led to the Civil War. So just some lessons from this slideshow is there is a birthright, there is a right to citizenship by birth granted by the 14th Amendment and confirmed by the US Supreme Court in Wong versus the US in 1898. This right is rooted in the struggle to overturn slavery and gain equality for African Americans. This right was also fought for by Asian Americans, and it's very important today in the struggle for equality for oppressed nationalities. I just want to add that I think the main struggle in the past and going forward is the issue of the rights of Chicano and Mexicano and Central American and other immigrants, that their children are citizens by birth, and then it's been sort of highlighted with this birtherist sentiment. So I guess I'll turn now. I think I'm on my last slide, and sorry, I'm looking at my phone. Were there other movements or cases that fought for citizenship prior to the 14th Amendment? I'm sure there are. My main history background is actually in Asian American history, so I know about the struggles in particular of Japanese and Chinese and Filipinos for citizenship rights, but many of the struggles of all oppressed nationalities have focused or have been somewhat related to this. So unfortunately, I don't have more details on this. There's another question here. Do you think birtherism will continue to follow Harris around during this election? I unfortunately think that it will. It certainly followed President Obama around, candidate Obama around, and it followed him as president. So I remember, I think it was in 2010 after he became president, the right-wing party here in California is actually the American Independent Party that was started by arch segregationist George Wallace back in 1968, and they still had voting ballot status. I think they've lost it by now, but the Senate candidate for the American Independent Party in California was basically his three-point program was impeach President Obama, convict President Obama, and deport President Obama. So this was years into his candidacy. So I have, again, no doubt that this birtherist controversy will continue. And I think part of it is to, it's not even, around just Kamala Harris as an individual, but it's trying to perpetuate the idea that the only people who can really be citizens and have full rights in the United States are white Americans. So it's tinged with sort of a white supremacist outlook. And it's also a way to try and undermine the legitimacy of the Democratic Party or different of elections. And so we can see that already in another aspect with Trump trying to delegitimize a mail-in voting, even though, of course, as everyone knows, Trump mails in his vote himself, and so it's sort of like, and so what's the difference? Well, I don't want to go on what the difference is. I'm sure it will be there. Do we think birtherism popular movement ideology outside of Trump's circle? I think so, because Trump really didn't have a circle back in 2008. He's the one who's been part of or joined this sort of white supremacist tendency years ago. And so it's going to continue, I have no doubt, even beyond Donald Trump, because I think there's, two types of people who are, at least two types following Trump. You have the Trump sort of lackeys, and I think this might be, best applied to, say, some of the whoever survives in his cabinet and a lot of the Republican senators. Up until Trump, they weren't. Many of them, I don't think, were known as out and out white supremacists. But when Trump went that way, they decided, I just have to go with Trump. But there was a white supremacist movement before Trump got into office. He's amplified it, he's encouraged it, and he's legitimized it. But it will certainly continue to exist after Trump is gone. If birtherism is so ludicrous and disputed by history, why do people believe it and support it so strongly? Unfortunately, I think there's a whole trend on the right to basically, I mentioned this, I think I mentioned it earlier, to make up this alternative reality, where the strongest case you can see today is sort of the COVID-19, I call it COVID-19 denialism, basically that it's not that bad, it's no worse than the flu, and don't worry about it, or we need to establish a herd immunity, and if, a lot of old people die, that's okay. I mean, that's sort of a total unreal sort of attitude rooted back with the climate change denialism. And I know, well, most of you aren't living here in the Bay Area, but yesterday it was like climate change on steroids. You're having 100-degree weather. We had, I think, somewhere over 300 fires started in the Bay Area the last few days because of the lightning strikes, which again is unusual to have. It's the biggest lightning strike that I've been here in the Bay Area for 60 years or more, and I've never seen so much lightning before. And so there's so many fires. They traditionally they name them. They can't even name them all together, and they're anyway. And so the air quality index, for those of you who are into that kind of stuff, it was over 200 here in San Jose, and we're not in the fires. We're nearby, but not in it. And so that's the worst air quality I have ever seen. And so this is, the dry weather, the thunderstorms, the drought, and then the heat are all related to climate change. And so this kind of denialism, and it's not just here. You could see there were massive windstorms in Iowa that damaged or destroyed 1/3 of their entire crop. There was a tropical storm just recently in New York City, and I know the climate in New York City has been upgraded or downgraded to semi-tropical, which is, it's ludicrous unless you're living there. So yeah, I'm sorry for all of you living in and around the Northeast. I'm not trying to laugh at you. It's just so the reality of climate change. And so I think it's some of the same reality. And, there's a lot of views on the right that are really just out of touch with reality and or don't, fundamentally don't, anyway, so I would say that. Are there other white supremacist dog whistles we should look out for during this election? I'm sure they're there. It's almost like I can't even, I can't even start to think of the white chauvinists, and I think there's also going to be a lot of misogynist stuff aimed at Kamala Harris. And I don't want to even go there. I'd have to, I try not to. Anyway, I'll take, yes, there will be, but I don't have any concrete idea. Oh, I do have some. I think that I'm only mentioning ones that have already come up, but I think that, Trump has long had this xenophobic streak. It goes back at least to the 1980s, where he was really anti-Japanese and promoted a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment when Japan had a rising economy. And I think that comes up today, where he's used the COVID-19 pandemic to really try and shut down the borders, whip up xenophobia, and try and blame, Mexico for bringing in the COVID-19, when in fact, if anything, the pandemic went the other way. I mean, the number of cases here in the United States have been much, much higher than in Mexico throughout the pandemic. And so I think the anti-immigrant stuff is going to be coming up. And he continues to do all kinds of anti-immigrant stuff, trying to limit legal immigration. He's virtually ended any kind of refugee entries, et cetera. And so there'll be, I'm sure, a lot of stuff about that. And then, of course, Trump has a pretty unprecedented use of racist, anti-Chinese and anti-Asian statements by calling the COVID-19 a Chinese virus, et cetera, and trying to blame China for the virus, when in fact it's, again, scientifically established, for almost certainly, but we don't have we don't have the bat that did it, but that it's very likely that it came from bats. And so, unfortunately, I wouldn't want to call it the bat virus either. But I think, to name it what it is a coronavirus, and it did come out in 2019. So we see this kind of anti-Latino and anti-Asian sentiment also being on the rise, and increasing amounts of attacks. I think it's most noticeable in percentage terms. It's not the largest by any means, because Asian Americans, even together, are much smaller oppressed nationality than Latinos or African Americans. But there's been a huge increase in attacks on Asian Americans, and including the most upsetting one to me, where a family was attacked, including a 2-year-old child, and stabbed. Luckily, no one died down in Texas. And so these kind of racist symbolisms will, I'm sure, will continue. Let's see, is there anything I want to add? Oh, okay. Stop sharing my screen. I'm sorry. And so thank you. I'd like to thank Michaela for helping to organize this. I just wanted to end up, of course, if you're interested in what I say, if you want to learn more about the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, or find out how you can join, you can go to our website. It's FRSO.org. And then if you go to FRSO.org/join, you can find information about how to join FRSO. I'd also like to recommend checking out Fight Back News, and that's, of course, at fightbacknews.org, one word, which is our newspaper, and it's both online and print, but it's mainly online. And you'll find most of my articles, actually, and if you've been watching me, are about the economy, but I do occasionally write articles about the oppressed nationality movements. here in the United States. And then, of course, many other people are writing articles. We have some of the best coverage of the struggle, the mass struggle that was set off by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I'd like you to check that out too. Anyway, I'm sorry, I think we had some technical delays and glitches, and this is the first time I've used PowerPoint. I hope you'll tune in again in the future and listen to other speakers. And I guess that will be all for this evening. Thank you very much.